Have you ever really stopped to think about what happens to your old microwave or your washing machine after it gets hauled away? It doesn't just vanish into thin air. There's this whole secret life, or you could say an afterlife, for our appliances. So let's dive into that hidden world and see how a certain set of standards is trying to make that afterlife a whole lot more sustainable.
Okay, so just picture it. You get that brand new, shiny, energy efficient fridge delivered. The crew takes the old one away, but where does it actually go? I mean, does it end up in a landfill, a scrap heap, or somewhere else? That's the question that more and more companies are having to answer, because honestly, what's at stake for the environment here is huge.
See, that old appliance is kind of like a mixed bag. On the one hand, it's this treasure trove of valuable stuff like steel and aluminum that can be recovered and used again. But on the other hand, it's also packed with some pretty hazardous materials. We're talking mercury, refrigerants that are really bad for global warming, and other toxic chemicals that you definitely don't want leaking into the ground. So, yeah, getting rid of it is a really complex puzzle.
And this is where something called the SASB standards comes into play. You can think of it like a rule book or maybe a guide that helps appliance manufacturers talk about how they're dealing with these end-of-life problems. It gives them a clear, structured way to report on their environmental and social impacts. That way, we can actually see who's taking responsibility for their products from cradle to grave.
The best way to solve a problem that happens at the end of a product's life is to think about it right from the very beginning. So this first part of the solution is all about being proactive with design, actually building these appliances with their eventual disposal in mind. Let's break down what that really means.
This whole proactive approach really boils down to 4 key things that companies are now reporting on. First up, just use materials that are easy to recycle. Simple enough. Second, get rid of or at least use as little as possible of the hazardous stuff. Third, and this one's a biggie, design products so they can be taken apart easily with regular, common tools. No special gear needed. And finally, properly label all the parts so the folks at the recycling plant know exactly what's what. It sounds like common sense, right? But it takes a real shift in how companies think about design.
And here's exactly why those design principles are so incredibly important. We're talking about managing some serious materials here. Toxic heavy metals like mercury and cadmium. We're dealing with all kinds of plastics, or what they call rigid polymers. And of course, those refrigerants that can be super potent greenhouse gases. A smart design helps recyclers safely separate the bad from the good, making sure those valuable metals get a second life while the hazardous materials are taken care of properly.
Okay, so smart design is step 1. But what about all the products that are already out there in our homes? Who's actually responsible for collecting and recycling them? Well, this brings us to a huge concept in this whole industry. It's called Extended Producer Responsibility, or EPR for short. And the name pretty much says it all. It's this idea that the company that made the product should have a role and a responsibility in what happens to it when you're done with it. It means they're actively involved in taking back, recovering, and recycling the very appliances they sold in the first place.
Now, here's a crucial detail. These EPR programs aren't all the same. Sometimes they're mandatory. That's when a government steps in and says, hey, appliance companies, you have to have a take-back program. It's the law. But other times, these programs are voluntary. This is when a company decides to do it on its own, maybe to hit its own sustainability goals, build a better reputation, or simply because customers are asking for it.
And when companies have to report on this, they get into the nitty-gritty of how they're involved. Some might run their own take-back programs directly. Others might team up with big retailers or other groups to handle the collection. They could also be funding joint ventures that build recycling facilities, or even putting money into research for brand new recycling tech. The most important part, though, is that they have to track their progress, actually measuring how much material they recover and how much gets recycled.
So we've talked about smart design, and we've talked about these take-back programs. But why does the reporting part of all this, using standards like SASB, actually matter so much? What's the real-world impact?
It's pretty simple, actually. There's an old saying, what gets measured gets managed. When companies have to publicly report on how they design for disassembly or how much stuff they recycle, it creates this really powerful incentive. It pushes them to innovate, to design better products, and to create less waste. This kind of transparency isn't just about numbers on a report. It's what actually drives us toward a more sustainable, circular economy for all the things we rely on every single day.
Which kind of leaves us with one last big question to chew on. Let's be real. We're facing a global waste crisis, and complex products like our appliances are a huge piece of that puzzle. So, is this kind of structured reporting, this corporate transparency,
Is that the most powerful tool we have to actually solve it? It's something to think about the next time you wave goodbye to an old appliance.